The champagne glass slipped from Lydia's hand as her mother, Marion, crumpled to the floor. Foam gathered at the corners of Marion's mouth while her body convulsed on the polished marble kitchen tiles. Grace Hamilton, 70 years old and sharp as ever, didn't move at first. Her only thought was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. Around them, guests gasped, phones came out, someone shouted for help. The retirement party she had been convinced to host in her own home had just turned into a crime scene. 2 hours earlier, the kitchen had been full of laughter and music. Grace had just sold her consulting firm for $23 million, a company she had built from nothing after her husband's death. Her son Ethan had insisted on throwing the party. "Mom, you deserve to celebrate," he had said, his dark eyes soft with sincerity. "Let Lydia handle everything. You just relax." Grace had smiled, but even then she'd noticed how eager Lydia was to play hostess. Lydia, who usually complained about loading a dishwasher, had become Martha Stewart overnight. She arranged flowers, polished crystal, hired a bartender and smiled at guests as though she owned the house. "Nothing's too good for you, Grace," she gushed, squeezing Grace's arm with nails that cost more than most people's groceries. About 30 people mingled between the kitchen and living room. Grace made small talk with her former business partner but kept one eye on Lydia. That was when she saw it. Lydia, standing at the champagne table, glancing around nervously. Her manicured hand reached into her purse and pulled out a small vial. Grace's blood turned cold as she watched Lydia empty the contents into a specific glass, the chipped one Grace always used at parties. A sensible woman might have screamed or called the police. Grace simply smiled and nodded at whatever her partner was saying. Sometimes the best way to catch a snake was to let it think it had cornered a mouse. Lydia approached, her expression a mask of concern. "Grace, you look tired," she said sweetly. "Here, have some champagne. You've earned it." Grace accepted the glass with a warm thank you. Minutes later, when Lydia turned to show off her new tennis bracelet to the neighbors, Grace quietly switched her glass with Marion's. The older woman, always distracted at parties, picked it up without a second thought. "This champagne tastes interesting," Marion murmured. 5 minutes later she collapsed. Grace knelt beside Marion as guests screamed. Lydia clutched her mother's hand, her voice high with panic. "Somebody call 911. Please hurry," she cried, her performance so close to convincing that most people believed it. But Grace had spent decades in a ruthless business world. She knew the difference between real fear and rehearsed theatrics. Her son Ethan pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "What happened?" he demanded. Lydia shook her head, tears spilling. "She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine, the next." Grace pressed her lips tightly together, studying their every move. The paramedics arrived quickly, pushing through the gathering guests with a stretcher. They lifted Marion carefully, checking her pulse and breathing. "Still alive," one of them announced. Lydia sobbed louder, gripping Ethan's arm. Grace, calm as ever, leaned close. "Which hospital?" she asked the lead paramedic. "St. Mary's," he replied. "Are you family?" Grace gave a thin smile. "Close friend," she said firmly, her eyes cutting toward Lydia. "I'll follow in my car." Ethan stepped in sharply. "Mom, no. You should stay. We'll handle this." "How thoughtful," Grace murmured, her voice sharp enough to slice through glass. "Keep the target at home while you figure out your next move?" Ethan flushed. "That's not what I meant." Grace raised her hand. "Nonsense. Marion is practically family. I'm coming." She grabbed her purse and keys before anyone could argue. Lydia bit her lip, her face paling. Grace followed the ambulance to the hospital, her mind racing. If her daughter-in-law thought she was an old fool, she was about to learn otherwise. At St. Mary's, Grace stayed close enough to overhear the doctors. Words like acute poisoning and plant alkaloids floated through the air. This wasn't food poisoning or a careless mix of medications. Someone had planned it carefully, choosing a toxin difficult to trace. Lydia paced the waiting room, heels clicking against the linoleum. each step like a metronome counting down her guilt. Ethan sat stiffly, his phone buzzing with messages he ignored. "This is just terrible," Lydia whispered. "Poor Mom. I don't understand how this happened." Grace patted her arm gently. "These things are mysterious. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out." Lucky she only had a few sips before collapsing. Lydia froze mid-step, her face paling further. "Champagne. You think the champagne?" "Oh, it's nothing," Grace waved dismissively. "Old woman's mind, finding patterns where there aren't any." But Lydia's trembling hands told Grace everything. Ethan's hawk-like stare followed every word, watching the silent chess game between his wife and his mother. Neither spoke again until the doctor returned. "Marian is stable," the doctor explained, "but she'll need to stay overnight." Lydia's relief looked exaggerated, her shoulders shaking with renewed sobs. "Can we see her?" she asked quickly. "Family only. She's sedated," the doctor replied. As they left the hospital, Ethan walked Grace to her car. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." Grace's lips curved into a small smile. "How considerate," she said softly. "But I'll be fine. I have my new security system, remember?" She kissed her son's cheek, climbed into her car, and watched them in her rearview mirror. Ethan and Lydia stood in the parking lot, whispering urgently. Grace noted every gesture, every glance. Back home, she poured herself a real glass of champagne from a fresh, untouched bottle. Settling into her study, she thought, "Time to figure out exactly what my loving family planned for me." She spent the night doing what she did best, research. Not online but through memory and suspicion. Someone had tried to kill her. Now she needed to understand why. At dawn, Grace brewed coffee and sat with a legal pad, listing everything she knew. Ethan's architectural firm had been bleeding money since the last recession. Lydia's jewelry boutique was more vanity project than business. Their lavish home in Westfield had a mortgage triple their means. Their luxury cars weren't paid off. Lydia's designer wardrobe alone could bankroll a school. Grace had helped them countless times. Tuition for her granddaughter Emma, a down payment on their house, money for tight months. Nearly $200,000 in 5 years. Generosity, she had thought. But maybe they saw it as an advance on her death. At 7:30 the phone rang. Lydia's concerned voice floated through. "Grace, I couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about you. After what happened to Mom, I worry maybe the food or drinks. Are you sure you're okay? You didn't feel sick." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Not at all, dear. Feel fine." "How is Marian?" Lydia sighed in relief. "Doctors think she'll go home today. They say she probably took medication on an empty stomach. You know how she is." Grace smiled faintly. Marian managed her pills like a soldier. Lydia was covering her tracks. When the call ended, Grace walked into the kitchen. The champagne bottle from last night still sat on the counter, 3/4 full. Innocent looking but deadly. She considered sending it for testing. Not that she needed proof, she'd seen Lydia herself. But evidence might be useful later. At 9 o'clock the doorbell rang. Ethan stood there with pastries from her favorite bakery. "Brought you breakfast," he said warmly. Grace let him in, making fresh coffee while he laid out the food. Watching him move around the kitchen he grew up in, Grace felt a pang of sadness. This was still her boy. When had he become her enemy? Ethan sat at the breakfast table, stirring his coffee slowly. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked with soft concern. Grace smiled faintly. "Takes more than a little excitement to shake me." His lips curved, but his eyes stayed flat. "That's what I was afraid of," he murmured. Grace raised a brow. "Afraid of what, dear?" Ethan leaned forward. "Yesterday showed me something. You're 70, living alone in this big house, with all that money to manage. Maybe it's too much for one person." Grace sipped her coffee, studying him carefully. "I've managed just fine until now." His jaw tightened. "Have you, though?" What if it had been you who collapsed? The words cut deep. Not from love but calculation. Grace placed her cup down. Marion collapsed in front of 30 witnesses and paramedics arrived in minutes. I'd hardly call that a cautionary tale about living alone. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, an old nervous tic. That's not what I meant. Jessica and I mean Lydia and I, we've been researching some options. There are communities, places where you'd have company, medical staff, everything you'd ever need. It's like living in a resort. Grace leaned back, feigning interest. Oh, how thoughtful. You've already been researching. His nod came too quickly. He pulled out his phone, showing glossy pictures. It's called Sunset Manor. Only 20 minutes away from us. Golf course, spa activities. Doesn't it look nice? Grace studied the smiling faces in the brochure. Elderly people playing bridge, doing water aerobics. They looked peaceful, maybe medicated. Ethan cleared his throat. There's usually a waiting list, but if someone wants to move in quickly, they need to pay the full entrance fee up front. $400,000. But it covers everything for life. Grace's eyes sharpened. 400,000. A tidy sum. Ethan forced a smile. It's an investment in your safety. Grace tapped her fingers against the table. That would certainly put a dent in my assets, wouldn't it? She said coolly. And once I'm safely tucked away at Sunset Manor, who would have power of attorney over my remaining funds? Ethan hesitated before replying softly. Well, I could. Just to handle the complicated things. Make sure everything is safe. Grace tilted her head. How generous of you. Ethan mistook her sarcasm for warmth and smiled wider. It's just about protecting you, Mom. Grace nodded slowly. Of course, dear. I'll think about it. Her heart tightened. She had just heard their plan spoken aloud. Ethan's relief was visible. Take all the time you need. Maybe next week we could drive there together, just to see it. Grace rose from the table, clearing the dishes with practiced calm. Perhaps. For now I should check on Marion. Ethan stopped her quickly. Actually, Lydia asked me to tell you the doctor thinks visitors might stress her. She needs rest. Grace froze, then forced a polite smile. Of course. How thoughtful. Inside, her suspicion hardened. They wanted her away from Marion until the toxins cleared. Until the evidence vanished. So predictable, she thought. After Ethan left, Grace sat in her study, the morning sun spilling across her legal pad. Timing was everything. They had waited until she sold her company. Smart. If she had died earlier, her money would have gone to Ethan anyway. But now, with millions liquid, they could stage her decline, isolate her and seize control. Her phone buzzed. Grace, said the familiar voice of Anthony Drake, her longtime attorney. How was the retirement party? Grace gave a humorless laugh. Eventful. I need to see you, Anthony. Soon. His tone sharpened. Is everything all right? Grace's gaze drifted to her garden. I'm not sure. But I think I'm about to find out. Anthony's office was as it had always been. Dark wood, leather chairs, the quiet smell of expensive cologne. He welcomed her with concern. Tell me everything, he said after closing the door. Grace detailed the evening. Marion's collapse, Lydia's nervous vial, Ethan's morning visit, the Sunset Manor suggestion. Anthony listened carefully, jotting notes. When she finished, he asked, You're certain about what you saw? Grace's eyes hardened. As certain as I'm sitting in this chair. Anthony tapped his pen against his lips. The problem is proving intent. Without testing the champagne, it's only your word. Grace leaned forward. Then let's test it. Anthony nodded. If poison is found, we have attempted murder. But Jessica, Lydia, could claim she was targeting her mother for insurance money. Or that it was a harmless additive. It's hard to prove who the intended victim was. Grace frowned. So even with proof, they could escape a murder charge? Attempted murder, yes. But there's something else. Anthony's expression grew grim. If they want your money, they may try another route, challenging your competency. At your age, living alone, stressed from selling your business, they could argue mental decline. Grace's blood chilled. The nursing home suggestion suddenly made perfect sense. What do I need to do? Grace asked. Anthony opened a file drawer, pulling out documents. First, we document your mental state. I'll arrange an evaluation by a geriatric psychiatrist, someone respected. Once that's on record, they can't claim confusion. Next, we restructure your estate. Trusts, directives, safeguards. If they want to play games, we'll make sure they lose. Grace leaned back, relief mingling with steel. Good. Let's play. They spent hours drafting protections. Automatic audits on her accounts, strict medical directives, and legal walls thicker than concrete. Anthony's final warning was sharp. Grace, they've tried once. They will try again. More carefully next time. Driving home, Grace considered his words. The attempt at the party had been sloppy. Lydia was careless, Ethan hesitant. But if desperation grew, so would their boldness. She remembered Ethan's suggestion she stay the night with them. How convenient that would have been. An old woman grieving a friend's sudden illness. A sedative to calm her nerves. A tragic overdose. Grace gripped the steering wheel. Whoa, not her. She wouldn't be their easy prey. The Hamilton matriarch hadn't built an empire to be undone by her own blood. She had one advantage. She knew their plan. And she was already steps ahead. The next morning, Grace made tea and sat at her dining table, the silence of the big house wrapping around her. The phone rang. Lydia's voice came soft, shaky. Grace, have you thought more about Sunset Manor? Ethan and I just want you safe. Grace smiled into the receiver. Dear, my safety has always been my own responsibility. Lydia hesitated. But don't you think, after what happened, it's time for a change? Grace chuckled. Oh, Lydia. The only change I see is how quickly you're trying to move me out of my own life. Lydia's voice faltered. That's not fair. Grace's reply was ice. No, dear. It isn't that afternoon. Grace drove quietly to St. Mary's Hospital. Against Ethan's advice, she wanted to see Marion. When she arrived, the nurse frowned. Visiting hours are limited. Grace's calm authority won. I'm practically family. In Marion's room, the frail woman blinked weakly. Grace, she whispered. Grace sat close. Yes, it's me. You're safe now. Marion frowned. The champagne. It tasted bitter. Strange. Grace's heart tightened. You noticed. Marion nodded faintly. But Lydia said I was imagining things. She told me not to say anything. Grace stroked her hand gently. Rest, Marion. Leave the talking to me. She now had confirmation. Back at home, Grace began keeping meticulous notes. Every call from Lydia, every suggestion Ethan made, every strange glance, all documented. She set up hidden cameras in the kitchen and living room, motion sensors at the doors. At night, she kept her bedroom door locked, a small panic button under her pillow. When Ethan called again, she answered with warmth but listened for cracks in his voice. Mom, maybe we should handle your finances for you. Just temporarily. Less stress on you. Grace laughed. Oh, Ethan, the only stress I feel is hearing how desperate you sound. He went silent. She had struck a nerve. By the end of the week, Anthony sent her the evaluation results. Sharp as ever, the psychiatrist had written. No signs of decline. Grace smiled at the official stamp. Let them try now. The same evening, Lydia arrived unannounced, carrying a casserole. I thought you might not feel like cooking, she said sweetly. Grace opened the door just wide enough. How kind. But I enjoy cooking. Keeps my mind sharp. Lydia's eyes flicked past her into the house. You shouldn't be alone so much, Grace. What if something happens? Grace's lips curved. Funny. That's what I told Marion. Lydia's face went pale. Later that night, Grace poured herself another glass of champagne, from her untouched safe bottle, and sat in her study. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind. Lydia's trembling hands. Ethan's two quick suggestions. Their whispered conversations in parking lots. They thought they were predators circling an old woman. They didn't realize she was the lion. Grace opened her notebook, writing one sentence in neat, sharp letters. If they want a war over my life, they'll get one. But it won't end the way they expect. The next morning, Grace met Anthony again. He slid a folder across the table. I've set up a new trust. If anything happens to you, Ethan and Lydia inherit nothing. Instead, the money goes to Emma's education fund and 2 charities of your choosing. Grace's eyes glinted. Perfect. Let's see how quickly their concern for my health evaporates when they realize they're not in the will. Anthony leaned forward. Grace, you're playing with fire. If they sense you're onto them, they may try something desperate. Grace smiled thinly. Then let them. I want to see how far they'll go. That evening, Ethan showed up again, looking tired. Mom, Lydia and I we worry about you. Grace tilted her head. Worry? Or scheme? Ethan frowned. Why would you say that? Grace placed her hand over his. Because, dear, I've been your mother for 32 years. I can tell when you're hiding something. His face tightened. You think I'd hurt you? My own mother. Grace's gaze was calm. I think you'd stand by while Lydia did. And that might be worse. Ethan slammed his fist lightly against the table. That's not fair. Grace's tone sharpened. Fair? Was it fair to slip poison into my glass? Ethan froze, his mouth opening and closing. What are you talking about? Grace leaned back. I saw her, Ethan. At the champagne table. Don't insult me with denial. He buried his face in his hands. I didn't know, not exactly. She said it was harmless, just something to calm you down, to help us. Grace's heart clenched. Her son had chosen loyalty to his wife over loyalty to his mother. Ethan, she said softly, do you understand what you're saying? You knew and you said nothing. His shoulders shook. I thought she wouldn't go through with it. I didn't think she'd try to kill you. Grace's eyes burned, but her voice stayed cold. Intent doesn't matter. Silence is consent. You chose your side. Ethan looked up, tears in his eyes. Mom, I never wanted this. We're drowning financially. Lydia's desperate. I thought maybe. Grace cut him off. Desperation is no excuse for murder. The next day, Lydia arrived again, all smiles. Grace, I booked a tour at Sunset Manor. You'll love it. Grace opened the door only halfway. How thoughtful, dear. But I've made other plans. Lydia's smile faltered. What plans? Grace's eyes glittered. Legal ones. With my attorney. Lydia blinked rapidly. Attorney? What for? Grace leaned closer, her voice a whisper. For snakes who forget they're trying to bite a lioness. Lydia's smile collapsed, her eyes flashing fear. She turned quickly. You'll regret this, she muttered. Grace closed the door with a soft laugh. 2 nights later, Grace woke to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. She pressed the panic button beneath her pillow. Within minutes, floodlights blazed and alarms screamed. She descended the stairs calmly, robe wrapped around her. 2 figures froze in the living room, caught in the white glare, Ethan and Lydia. Ethan's face twisted in shock. Mom, this isn't what it looks like, Lydia hissed. We thought someone broke in. Grace pointed to the hidden camera above. The police will enjoy this recording. Their expressions drained of color. The officers arrived quickly, drawn by the alarm system's direct call. Grace greeted them warmly. Officers, thank you for coming. My son and his wife seem to think my house belongs to them. Ethan sputtered. It was a mistake. Lydia clutched his arm, her voice shaking. We just wanted to check on her. The officer raised a brow. At 2 a.m, breaking a window. Grace folded her arms. They're not here to protect me. They're here to finish what they started. Lydia's scream of protest sounded hollow. At the station, Anthony joined Grace, presenting the doctor's reports, the security footage, and Marian's testimony about the bitter champagne. The detectives listened closely. One leaned forward. "Mrs. Hamilton, are you saying your daughter-in-law attempted to poison you?" Grace's voice was steady. "Yes, and my son knew. They wanted my money, all of it." Ethan groaned, putting his head in his hands. Lydia burst into tears. "She's lying. She's twisting everything." Grace only raised her chin. "The truth doesn't need twisting, dear. It stands on its own." The investigation stretched for weeks. Forensic tests confirmed toxins in the champagne. Marian testified weekly from her hospital bed. Neighbors recalled Lydia handling the drinks suspiciously. Ethan's text records revealed late-night discussions about plans and inheritance. When confronted with evidence, Ethan wept, insisting he had tried to stop Lydia. But Lydia never cracked. "It was never me," she repeated. Grace remained calm. To Anthony she said quietly, "Let them talk. Lies unravel faster than silk." Slowly, piece by piece, the case tightened around them. The day the verdict came, Grace sat in the courtroom, back straight, eyes sharp. The judge's words rang like a gavel strike against betrayal. Lydia Carter, guilty of attempted murder. Ethan Hamilton, guilty of conspiracy. Gasps filled the room. Grace felt neither triumph nor sorrow, only clarity. She rose, her navy suit crisp, silver hair gleaming under the lights. Walking past her son, she whispered, "You chose her over me. Now you'll live with that choice." Outside, reporters swarmed. But Grace smiled faintly. At 70, she had survived a ruthless world. Her empire still stood. And she remained unbroken.